So in this video is about LOBs. Now, there are two different types of LOBs that you can create. You can create the old-fashioned type of logs, or the new one, which has been introduced in 11G, called Securefile LOBs. So the default, though, is still the old-fashioned type of LOBs, which now we refer to as a basic file LOBs. And let's go ahead and create some and take a look at when a basic file lob gets created and when a secure file lob gets created. So let's just take a look at a few examples. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to create your basic table with a lob. So here I'm creating a CLOB and I'm using Tablespace users. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's query DBA lobs and see what gets created. So here I'm going to be querying DBA lobs. I can find out the column names associated with the table that has the lobs, and there's a column called Securefile that will tell us whether it's the newfangled type of lob or not. And the answer is no. So it's a basic file lob. So what governs this is a parameter called DB Securefile lob. DB Securefile. Let's look at that. Securefile. And the default the default is of DB Securefile is actually permitted, but there are other values. You can have never, always, and ignore. In this case, permitted means that if you explicitly state secure file, it's going to create a secure file. But you have to explicitly state it. There's a never, which means that it will never create a secure file. There's ignore, so if you mention any of the secure file options, it will be ignored and it will always create a basic file. And there's always, which means by default it will create a secure file. And incidentally, this is 11G, but in 12C, the secure file log becomes the default. So let's take a look at some other create table statements and see how they work. Okay. In this case, I'm going to create a basic file lob, and in this other case, I'm going to create a secure file lob. So I just wanted to show the different syntax. Not that it's really that difficult. So these tables look exactly the same, except for the fact that our CLOB here is stored as a basic file lob, and our CLOB here is stored as a secure file lob. Notice the syntax. Once you create your table, then you specify the word lob and the column name, and you say store as whatever it is, basic file or secure file, and you can specify, among other things, you can specify the table spaces. So let's go ahead and create these, and then we'll query DBA lobs. And I don't know if I mentioned this already, but see that the table is placed in one table space, but the lob itself is put into a different table space. The same here with the secure file lob. So now let's look at I believe it is. So let's look at that. Okay, so notice that the basic file lob is that the column is now stored as just a basic file, not a secure file. And when we explicitly stated in the second example to store the secure lob column as a secure lob, it does in fact store it as a secure lob. So this section is on LOB properties. There's basically 5 different LOB properties. There's caching, which will allow you to cache your LOB into memory. There's deduplication, which will deduplicate similar LOBs, so it reduces storage. There's storage out of row, which means that the LOB won't be stored with the regular data at all. The default is that it will try to store at least some parts of it inside the row, and then of the regular table. There's chunk size, which tells you how to access the LOB in terms of the number of bytes to read the LOB, and then finally there's LOB compression, so you can specify some sort of LOB compression. We're going to do all of those examples here and look at DBA LOBs and query them. So the first one I want to do is, let's go ahead and create a cached table. So let's So in here, this general syntax is to create your table, then specify the LOB, so in this case LOB, secure LOB, which is the name of my column, the store as Securefile, and then say Tablespace, and I'm actually giving it a specific tablespace. I didn't have to, but I can just say cache. So let's go ahead and create that. And let's query it. So we're going to look at DBA LOBs, and there's a column called cache, and it is cached. Okay, the next one is deduplication. So we're going to create a deduplicated LOB properties, or we're going to associate the deduplication property with this particular LOB. So let's look at that. So same syntax as before, but now I'm going to say deduplicate. And let's query it. And the column we're going to be looking at in DBA logs is called deduplication. And here it says LOB is deduplicated. So the next example is storage out of row. So let's go ahead and do that one. Storage out of row. Again, the syntax is the same thing here. So look at this. The syntax is a little awkward. Disable storage in row. So we're this is the syntax to get it out of row. So so now let's run that and see what DBA LOBs has to say. So there's a column called inRow. So let's see what it says when we run it. So it's no longer in row, it's out of row. But the syntax is disable storage in row. Next is chunk size. So let's take a look at that. The syntax again is very similar. Now this time we specify a particular chunk size, and let's actually run it and query it. And here, a column called chunk is the specified amount of chunk size that we're using. Finally, let's look at LOB compression. And so syntax is again very similar. So we're going to say compress high here. So let's go ahead and run it and query it. And notice now that this particular column has a high compression for this particular LOB. And that's it for this section. So in this section we're going to move some LOBs around. It just so happens that we can have the table in one tablespace and the segment, the LOB segment and its corresponding index in a separate tablespace. So let's show how that's done. The first thing I'm going to do is log in. Some scripts to look at. So let's go ahead and create the LOB segment table. So see, I am creating the table, and I'm putting the table in Tablespace T1, and the LOB, I'm putting in Tablespace LOB TBS01. So let's go ahead and run it, and we'll query it too. So the first thing let's do is cat query 14. Okay, here we're going to look at the DBA tables, and we should see T1. So let's see. And sure enough, we do. And query 15. Now we're going to query DBA LOBs, and we see that the the LOB segment and index are in LOB TBS01 as we had stipulated in the syntax. Now let's move things around. Well, we move tables as we've always moved tables using the alt table move. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's move the table. So in here we're just moving the table to Tablespace T2. So this should be T2. So let's go ahead and run it. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's query 14. Here it is. Okay. Oh, I guess we haven't moved it yet. Let's move it. And now let's query. And you can see we've moved the table to Tablespace T2. But the LOB segment hasn't moved at all. It's still in LOB TBS01. Let's go ahead and move it now. So now we're going to move it to LOB TBS02 while leaving the table alone. So let's go ahead and run this. And let's run the table space hasn't moved, but the LOB segment and its corresponding index has. And that's the end of this section. So in this section I want to talk about the LOB segment name and the corresponding index name. When we create a table with a LOB in it, it will create a segment and an index, a LOB segment and a LOB index, and give them system generated names. But we can also give them the names ourselves too if we want to. So I'm going to show you both examples, one where the names are system generated and in another case where I've actually explicitly stated what those segment index names are. So let's, without further ado, let's show you how that's done. I'm going to log in. And here is the syntax. So let's look at it. We're going to do our basic command here. You've seen this before already. So we just say store as Securefile, and we say which table space the LOB goes into. And let's go ahead and run that. Oops. Okay. And then let's do cat query 15. Let's actually run that. So I created the table, and I did not specify the segment name or the index name, and they're given system generated names. But I don't have to do that. I can actually name them if I want to. So let me show you that syntax. In this example, I actually say store as, I give it the segment name, and and I give the index name. So let's go ahead and run that, and then we'll query again. Now let's compare. Now in the second example, I specify the segment name and the index name, and it gives it those names that I've chosen. So we can opt for system generated names, or we can actually specify the names if we wish. And that's the end of this section. So in this section, we're going to use DBMS redefinition. We're going to take a table that was created with that has a LOB in it that is a basic file LOB and convert it to a table that has a secure file LOB. And the way to do that is to use DBMS redefinition. And a good example of this is in the Database Administration Guide in Chapter 20. And the scripts that I'm going to use that you're about to see are really taken from that. So let's go ahead and look at some of the scripts that I'm about to do. I'm going to actually first create a table, a basic file table. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create this basic file table that's owned by Soleo, or the Soleo user, because you can't use DBMS redefinition on tables that are owned by sys. So I'm actually creating these tables as a different user. So in this case, we're creating a table. The table has a basic file LOB in it, and the table and the LOB itself are in different table spaces. There's a primary key constraint on the ID column of the table, and that's about it here. So let's go ahead and run it. Alright, the table has been created and altered, so that means it has a primary key. Let's query it actually. So I'm going to query from DBA LOBs, and notice here that the column basic LOB is not a secure file, which means it's a basic file. And let's do cat query. And notice that the table here has two indexes, one that is the primary key that I've created, and the other which is the LOB index. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create an interim table. So the only thing different here is that I'm creating an interim table. The LOB now is defined as a secure file, and notice I am not creating any primary keys here. When I do the redefinition, it will convert all. It will do that thing for me. So I will show you that in just a second. So let's go ahead and create the interim table, and then now let's query. Run some queries here. Alright, so now again, the difference between the basic file and the interim table is the interim table, it has the basic CLOB converted to a secure file. And now let's look at the indexes. Okay, so here we have just the one index associated with the LOB. There is no primary key. So now we're about ready to start the redefinition process, and there is a procedure you can run to see whether redefinition will work or not, and it is called can redef, and let's look at that. So we run this procedure, and if there's no errors returned, then we can continue. If there are errors returned, then there's something innately wrong with the basic file table that we can't use the DBMS redefinition. So notice here one of the options I'm using is use primary key. So let's go ahead and run it. Got no errors, which means that now we can go ahead and start our redefinition process. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's see what it looks like. Again, the great example here is in the Administrator's Guide, Chapter 20. So we're going to start the redefinition process from the basic file table to the interim table. Seemed to work pretty well too. So and the last part is to finish the job, and let's look at that. Okay, so in this we're calling a PL SQL block we're doing the copy table dependence, the syncing the interim table. In this particular case, we're copying all the columns as they are. We don't have to do any column mapping or anything like that, so it's very easy to do. We're finally syncing the interim table, which probably isn't necessary since there's no activity on this table. But then finally we run the finish redef. So let's go ahead and run it. And it completed successfully. So now let's run our queries that we've been running before. And notice that we've done a flip-flop here. Our basic file table has now been converted to a secure file table, and our interim table is not a secure file table. So, and if we had actual data in this particular table, the data would have been moved from the old basic file table to this new one, which now has a secure file log. So let's look at the indexes. So now notice that we have a primary key for the basic file table, and that has been created for us. So the old basic file table was moved to the interim table, but the basic file primary key was recreated here for us. And that's it for this section. So in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to load a table with LOBs using SQL Loader. The trick here with SQL Loader and LOBs is that in the CSV file or whatever the data file that you use to load with, you don't use the LOBs themselves, but the names of the LOBs. And in the control file, you reference the names of those files initially as a filler, and then you use the LOB file function to actually populate the logs. So I'm going to show you how to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is actually create a table. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and create the table. Let's look at it actually. So I'm going to call this table SQL Loader LOB table, and there's a number of columns here. One that's a number, one that's a varchar, a date, a clob, and a blob. So that covers pretty much all of the important data types. Now, as I said before, when we actually have our data file that we're loading, we don't actually explicitly put in the LOBs in the data file themselves, but we put the names of the LOBs. So let's go ahead and look at that. I have a SQL LOB CSV. And let's compare that to the table itself. So the first column is going to be the number content, the second column is the varchar2 content, third column is the date content, then there are clobs.txt and blobs. The Word documents themselves. So, so now let's look at the control file. Okay, so in the control file, we reference this CSV. We're going to put it into this table. Fields are delimited by columns, and sometimes they're delimited by double quotes. And so here's the trick here. So the number is going to be the number, the varchar2 is going to be the varchar2 content, the date is going to be formatted in DDMONYYY, but, and here's how the clobs and the blobs work. So the next line is the clob file name, so we actually reference it as a filler, and in the next column we say, okay, the content itself is lob file of this filler, so we put this guy here, and we say terminated by EOF, and the same thing for the blob. So now let's go ahead and populate this table. So we just created it, so select star from. So there's no, whoa, did we not create it? SQL LOB table? I guess we didn't. So let's go ahead and do that. I thought we had created. Alright, so now we created the table. So now let's exit out and select, actually select star from SQLLDR table. Okay, so it's empty. Let's exit. Now let's go ahead and run SQL loader, SQLLDR. User ID is equal to control is equal to the control file that we just looked at. Okay, so now let's do SQL plus SSDA count star from LDR table, and now we have 2 records. In fact, let's go ahead and look at, we can format this this query here. Let's take a look. Okay, so I'm going to look at the CLOB content because it's pretty short. I'm going to look at the length of the blob content only, though. So now let's just go ahead and run this query. Okay, great. So now we see the rows that have been loaded. So in this section, we're actually going to load LOB data with PL SQL. It turns out that it's not too difficult. So I have a script, and let's take a look at how that's done. Alright, so first I have a table that was already created that has both a blob and a clob in it, and so I'm going to insert data into the table. Now, actually I'm going to insert into the SQLLDR table. So the first column is a number, the second column is a varchar, the third column is a date format, and then then there's a clob and a blob. So here's how we load those using PL SQL. The first off is that we're going to need a directory object. Why do we need a directory object? Because we have to define where the B files or where the LOB files are actually located. So the first thing I do is I go create a directory object, which I reference here. So here's the directory object name, and when I open the B files or the location of the LOB files, I actually mention the directory object name. So the way to load this, let's just start with the insert statement, is this isn't very different from any other insert statement, except where we insert the clob and the blob, we say empty. Empty clob, empty blob. And then we also say returning and the column names into a clob and a blob, a defined blob and a clob. So then that's really step 1. Then we open up the B file. So this is a clob B file, and which we have defined up here. And then all we do is load the data. For the clob, we use, first of all, we use the DBMS LOB package procedure, load clob from file and load blob from file when we load a blob, and they are different in terms of the number of parameters that you have to pass. There's 2 other important parameters, or 2 unique parameters that you have to pass for clobs, and that is the language content and the warning. I set the language context to be 1 here, and the warning I just set because it's an in-out variable and it will get set for me. So then, all right, so we have done this. We've inserted the empty blob. We have opened the clob for read-only, and then we pretty much finished the job in terms of loading the clob by saying load clob from file. We mentioned the clob, the B file, in this case we have to mention the size, but we can use DBMS LOB max size. This is actually referenced in the PL SQL packages and procedures guide. so you can see what that is. And then we have to mention the dest offset, the source offset, and the language context and the warning. And then we reset the dest offset and source offset because we're going to do this again, but this time with LOBs. And notice that we don't have a language or warning because these are blobs, so we're going to actually put in, this is not language specific, there's no NLS, anything here, we just want the actual raw data to be loaded. So then once we're done we say commit. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now. And now let's go ahead and select count star from SQLLDR LOB table, and now we have three rows in it. The first two came from when we loaded this table with SQL Loader, but the last column is, or sorry, the last row is row 3, where we load this with PL SQL. So let's look at let's format this select statement just to look at the at the data. And there we have it. We have this record that's been inserted, and we've loaded both a clob and a blob. And that's it for this video.